Hello everyone and welcome to this painting video where we are finally going to be taking, if you've been following the build vlog, the altar of the Succubi, and I'm going to show you on front camera first because it is quite a big model when you see it in someone's hands. This is an incredibly intricate miniature. It feels a bit weird even calling it a miniature, but what I want to do with this in the first segment of the video is get it primed. Now I had considered using just aerosols and stuff like that, but if you can hear the noise in the background, that means there's a compressor in the room. And if there's a compressor in the room, that means we're going to be getting the airbrush out, which is great. I think the airbrush is actually shot, it's like over here somewhere. So we're going to be airbrushing this, but once we have the primer down, we're going to be using a lot of contrast paints. So the priming stage is basically the most vital part of this, and I'm going to explain why. Because contrast paints do really well over their base colours, their assigned base colours, the Wraithbone and the Grey Seer. But what I want to do is to get the most out of the contrast paints. I'm going to spend longer on the priming and the shading of the model before we even put the contrast paints anywhere near the miniature. So I have a range of paints here in front of me that I'm going to be using just for this step. So first off, we're going to be using the Stynylrez, the Stynylrez Airbrush Primer Black. So the entire miniature is going to get a coat of that. After that, we're going to be moving on to the Stynylrez Grey, which is just a shade up. But then, on top of that, we're also going to be putting a layer of Citadel Grey Seer, I'll go again through the airbrush. And we're going to start using this in layers. So black will be first, which will cover the whole model. The darker of the two greys will cover the majority of the model. The Grey Seer will then start to pick out the contours and the highlighted areas, the lighter sort of shades. And finally, we have the Stynylrez White Airbrush Primer as well. And that's going to pick out our hot spots, where light is going to be glinting, almost glinting, sort of off certain parts, or areas that are a bit smaller and just deserve that little extra glint or that little extra shine of light upon it. That's going to work really well on the harpies and the characters and stuff that's on the miniature. The rest of it is going to look alright too. We're going to pick out plenty of things in here. Doing this in 4 stages like this will give the contrast paint the best opportunity to shade and accentuate the highlights that we're putting on on the base coats. So without further ado, I'm going to put some of the black into my airbrush. The airbrush I'm using, if I can hold it up under close cam, is the Green Stuff World reference 1395 with a 0.3 needle in there. And that's one that we have in the store. I've used it a few times. You might have seen the little tutorials on how to clean, how to strip and all that sort of stuff and how to use. If you're new to airbrushing, this is the kind of task you want to be learning with. So priming your miniatures, adding a little bit of pre-shade, adding a bit of highlighting and stuff before you put your paints down. This will work really well if you're liking how your contrast paints work, if you enjoy using contrast. The airbrushing stage as a primer slash base coat slash shade, pre-shade, will all help and all aid you in making that contrast paint work a little harder for you. So we're going to start off with the black, and we're going to fill it up. Well, we're going to put about half a pot, maybe 2/3 of a pot in there. So let's move that to the side. I am going to put a little bit of flow improver into it because this is going to take a while and I don't want the paint starting to dry too quickly as I'm applying it. So just a few drops of that in there. Flow improver use very sparingly, guys, if you're trying to do it and you have some flow improver. Very sparingly. If you're putting in half a cup of paint, put in maybe 3 to 4 drops of flow improver just to slow the drying process down a little bit. Now, I will also shake this up just to make sure that flow improver gets into the paint. It's been a while since we've used the Stynylrez stuff, so I thought it was also a safer measure just to put some flow improver into it as well. I have forgotten one thing. People that complain to me and say, why are you not wearing gloves when you're airbrushing? Good point. Get them on. Good stuff. I also have a respirator. Because I'm doing so much airbrushing in this room, we have ventilators and stuff in here as well, they're on, but you will find that the room will get a little bit hazy, and we want to make sure that I continue making these videos for a long time to come, so respirator. Awesome, cool. Right, we're going to check the flow of our paint here. So let's have a look at our palette cam. Yep. That's very much the consistency I want. So let's go for it then. So that's looking pretty good. It's also letting me have the first look at how my green stuffing jobs went, and I'm actually kind of challenged to find where exactly I put the green stuff now. Now obviously I know I put it down here connecting the crucible to the tree, and that still looks pretty natural to me, so I'm quite happy with that. Now, it's getting very warm in here. And we're moving on to the grey, the darker grey now, which is the Steinelres grey, which is kind of more muted than the grey seer, obviously, because grey seer is very high. So, do my mask back up. I have it in the airbrush ready to go. This time around, we're going to be doing a bit of a broader coat. We're not going to be going into every detail this time, but we are going to be catching the majority of the upper surfaces of the model. So, for example, let's get it into shot, and we'll work on the lady at the top here first. Sort of like that. So we're going to be doing most of the miniature in this grey now. I also, in this coat, I want to cut back to the front camera a wee sec, because I want to show you how far away I'm actually pressing, triggering the airbrush from. So I'm about a foot away or so, and that's just to make sure that most of this grey is going in an even spread around the miniature. We don't want to highlight anything as such just yet. We'll just make sure that we have everything we want on this part. I like this sort of fade that's happening here, so I think I'm going to retain that. So let's move that off to the side. The other stuff, like the harpies and the slaves... Hang on. Hang on. Let's do that. You can hear me a bit better. So the harpies and the slaves are all being done separately off the model, obviously, as you can tell. So, for example, the slaves I've put onto a bit of a priming stick here. So just a piece of wood with some double-sided tape on it, and they've been applied onto it like so. So we'll be doing those next, as well as the harpies. So at this stage, the initial grey primer is down, and I want to just show a couple of things. So you can see some of the harpies here. It's just meant to add a little bit more to what the black is already doing. It's meant to add a little bit of contour, a little bit of shading, a little bit of highlight, but it's meant to bring up a little bit off the black. On the carriage itself, it doesn't really look like much, does it? You only get to really see it with the gradient going from here to the underside of the crucible. That's not a big deal. Our next step is going to bring this up a bit more, quite a lot actually. And as I said before, it's going to be using Citadel's grey seer base coat. Now this has been thinned about, I would say 2 to 1, 3 to 1. So if you take, let's say if you take 2 milliliters of the paint, or a couple of drops of the paint, you're going to be putting in about 2 drops of thinner and another drop or 2 of flow improver, just to make sure that that process has started and it's nice and thin. I can show you the consistency, so... It goes alright through the airbrush once you've got it thinned down enough. Anyway, clip it back on and let's start. So this level of highlighting is going to be a little bit more focused. It's going to be focused on larger areas that are sort of in that area where you want light to be hitting it. So let's see what we can do.
something very much like this, where the higher areas now look a lot brighter than the recesses. So if I even roll the miniature over a little, you get a lot more of the darker colours right down to the black in certain places. But the characters in particular stand out rather nicely against that backdrop, that sort of darker one. But this is the overall sort of fill light, so to speak, and then we can go in with our white once we have all this done. I think with the right care and attention on the white, we're going to have a very good looking miniature.
So at this stage, all the grey sear has actually been applied now, and we can show a couple of examples of that. While I was waiting for this to dry and cleaning the airbrush out, I realised a couple of things. One, there's a lot of flesh going on this miniature. There's the harpies, obviously, there's the slaves, and then there's also characters on here. The harpies and that I'm not too worried about because they're more of an ethereal thing anyway, so I think the white airbrush will be enough for them, that once we start putting down, hopefully I'm going to be looking at purples and stuff like that for their skin. But with these ones here, these two and these two up here, they are definitely far more human than the others. So I think after this airbrush step, we may just do a little bit of toning with some Wraithbone, which is the other Citadel base colour, and we'll tone them in a little bit before we start applying a flesh-coloured contrast paint to them, because that will accentuate that sort of underlying sort of, that sort of, skin's almost on the pinkish brown scale colour-wise, and I want the more human characters on the miniature to actually look a bit more human. As I said, the harpies not too worried about at all. I think purples and stuff, keeping them rather dark and odd looking, will work better for the miniature. But with these 4 characters in particular, I want them to have a bit more of a human tone to them. So with that said, I'm going to work on with the white. So we have our white airbrush primer here. I have a little bit of thinner in the bottom of the cup of the airbrush, and I'm just going to put that in like so. I'm going to slap the lid on, give it a bit of a shake as well. I see there's a little bit of... That's alright. Just shake that, and then we'll quickly show that under close cam before I stick my mask on. Consistency looks good, and that's as bright as I want to make it, obviously, apart from a couple of little bits here and there. So, on with the mask.
So let's start with some harpies. Let's start with these ones. And we want to focus, I want to keep the wings dark, but I want to focus on the flesh tone being quite visible. So when we get the airbrush going here, we really want to focus their center mass in their head. And down the leg as well, as you can see on this one. Something like that, which really brings that skin out. And what that does is draw your eye, once these have got colour on them, it'll draw your eye to them and make it look very hectic and chaotic with all the dark wings and stuff, and then this bright sort of pinkish purple flesh going on. So this is what I mean by the white being a lot more pointed than the previous 3 steps. So let's move on to the back. Basically that, and we're going to do that across the whole miniature as well. So if I put them to the side, let's very briefly look at the top up here. Now this area here I want to do as blood later on, so I'm not going to be highlighting that too much. I'm going to use some effect paint to try and get that together, hopefully. But I do want her robe, her skin, and the woman that she's sacrificing to be a bit brighter. So starting to build that up there. Let's see if we can take it up the cloth a bit. Not too much though, just a little bit in this case. And then over the top of her head, and down the front of her body. Basically that. This woman is at the top of this altar. She is bathing in whatever light there is in front of her or above her, and everything else around her pales into comparison when she's doing her job. So further down, making these two stand out as well. We'll look at the back of the hair. At this stage, we don't know what colour I want to do the hair and stuff yet, so we're just doing it as a precaution, just to, you know, a bit of a coverall. Something like that. So that makes them stand out really nice. However, we are going to pick out some of the faces and stuff on here as well, so let's just see what we can do. So as you can see now, what I've been doing is picking out areas with a little bit of raised detail and bringing them right up. So what we have now is a fade from a complete black colour going all the way up through 2 shades of grey to white. And what that's letting us do is add so much definition to the miniature and showing us where all those details are, what they are importantly as well, because we can highlight the demonic faces and eyes and stuff with this, so we can actually draw attention to that on purpose. So I'll continue on with the harpies, and when we come back, we'll have it all dry, and we'll be ready to add some colour.
So with all our priming and our zenithing all done, let's take a quick look over this. So the white has been used to highlight sort of the key features and sort of shapes on the model, and hopefully the step that we're moving on to now will show you how much dividends that will pay us now as we start to use contrast paint. So we're going to be starting with all the wood here, so all this sort of gnarled old tree that's been grown on to this, well, it looks like a carriage that's made of stone and big timbers and stuff like that. We're about to see if this works. So for the wood for the tree, we're going to be using contrast paint wildwood. There's not a lot of this left because Warren stole a lot of it for some other projects. So if I run out, I'm going to have to go get another pot. Not a big deal though. We're using a nice big brush to apply it with as well, and let's scoop out some of it onto our palette. And you can see just how dark this is. It's actually kind of thick. I think he's left the pot open for a while, so we're going to have to add a bit of contrast medium just to liven it up a bit. So let's add some contrast medium to that mixture, and let's see if we can liven this up a bit. I think that looks a bit more fluid now. That's great. Let's just pick some areas out and just start applying it pretty heavily over all of that area. We're not too worried about getting any onto this because I'm going to do this in a traditional style. We're going to use some regular metallic paints and washes to sort that out. But I want the tree to have a very low contrast. I don't want it to look like it's one of the key features of the miniature. I want it to be there as the structural piece that it's intended to be. So using wildwood, I'm hoping to bring that down and let the airbrush highlighting do a lot of the work for me. Now obviously there'll be detail areas that we're going to pick out, teeth, mouths, that sort of stuff, and we'll see just how well the contrast works on this being applied in the way that it is. And the best thing about this model is that there's so much detail in the sculpt, it really lends itself to being played with contrast paints. There's just so much for the paint to get into and settle on that hopefully it should give us some very interesting results. And I've been particularly looking forward to applying this colour because I know that it's one of those make it or break it moments where if this colour works, we're on the right track, but if it doesn't work, we're going to have to approach it in a different way, which is fine. There's no harm in doing that. Although, to blow my own trumpet a little bit, it is very hard to see where I've added green stuff now that all the primer's down, so I'm quite happy with that. I feel like I can afford to be a little bit chuffed at this stage. So as we get down to some of the details like skulls and stuff that's embedded into the wood, we're going to be a little more careful with the application of the contrast paint on there, just to make sure that we're not covering that up and we'd have to go back over it again, thus ruining all the airbrush work that we've done earlier. And what contrast paint does really well is that depending on the colour of the base coat, so if you've used Wraithbone, you're going to get a slightly warmer look, but because I've gone through a grayscale from black to white, I'm getting a very cold, dead coloration going on, and that's exactly the kind of effect that I want, because the characters on the model and the actual living beings around the model are what will bring it to life. The rest of it I'm not so concerned about. I just want to make sure that it looks dull and dark and a bit more sinister. So the wildwood is now all done and it is dry, and what we can see under close cam is something I'm very happy with. The effect that this has given with all the zenithing and stuff that we did with the airbrush really has shown up all that nice detail and all that nice wood grain that's in there. See, I've also done the wheels so that we can be sure that we've covered all the areas that I want to be a very deep dark wood, and the overall result is a very deep dark wood, which is really nice. It also has a sort of a deadish sort of look to it, so I know wood kind of goes pale when it starts to decompose and stuff, but I kind of wanted this to look really dark because everything else on top of it should be a bit lighter, and then we'll get up to areas where the real visual interest will happen, and that'll be a lot brighter and a lot more stark, basically. So from the dark wood, we're going to move on to the light wood, which is the platforms. There's one on the front with the two characters, and then there's one on the back which has nobody stood around on it. And I'm going to try snakebite leather for this one, another contrast paint, and I just want to see what happens. And even if I don't like it, what I can do then is later on add a wash to it to darken it down a bit more, perhaps an Agrax or a shade maybe, or Null Oil. So let me see, let's get some of it out on the palette here. It's a bit more of a reddy brown, which is going to work quite well, I think. And let's just see what this does. This should make it look like it is a different construction compared to the trees, so that's the aim anyway, and hopefully this should work out well. So we'll go ahead and add this to all the wood areas that I want to be in this colour, and then we'll see how we get on from there. And what I'm noticing straight away is that in the darker areas where it's sort of fading into the colour where the wildwood is, it starts to look like it belongs a bit more. It's not standing out too much, but obviously where it's highlighted, it's a lot more stark and a lot more visible. And again, we want to be fairly careful around these two characters because we don't want to get too much paint onto them unnecessarily if we want to keep our airbrush work valid for subsequent layers. I think that's going to look alright once it's dry. And we'll move on to the back one, this little bit here. So not too much of this colour to put down at least, so we can be thankful for that. And I don't think putting this over the top of the wildwood is going to really affect it too much. It might stain it a bit more, but it's not, you know, just in case you make a mistake and you go over the lines a bit, it's not too much of a problem. So basically that. I think these two colours are actually starting to work well together. As I see them a bit closer together, they do seem to be working alright. So again, I'm just going to make sure I catch underneath here as well. It's not going to matter as much as the other one, but I've got to make sure that I've done it anyway, because there will always be little awkward spots that I miss. So particularly around the edges here, around the sides of these protrusions. Okay, so I think that will do for those two platforms. I think that looks rather good. Now, from there we're going to move on to looking at the rock sort of cementy sort of formation that's underneath all of this wood effect and skulls and chains and stuff. And I don't have a lot of it left, thanks to Warren doing what he does when he goes to a painting project and just basically steals everything. I have some basilicanum grey, again another contrast paint, and I want to focus it on the rocky sort of protrusions coming out underneath some of the woodwork. So hopefully there's enough of this left to manage that. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast medium to it as well, because I don't need it to do a lot of work. I just need it to tint the stonework, so I'm just going to have to try and make it last a bit longer and go a bit further. As you can see, it's just these sort of flattish areas here that I want to catch with the basilicanum grey. Again, try and work it in and around the skulls without hitting the skulls too much. So I think that's going to look alright. If by some means I do manage to mess up a few of the skulls, we'll just go over them with a bit of grace here. This really is more of an experiment to see what a very bespoke miniature looks like when you start being careful with applications of contrast paints, and see if you can get a decent result for something that is clearly designed to be a painting project, you know, clearly made to let people explore new things and explore different techniques and stuff. And I just want to see if someone that really likes this miniature that isn't so experienced with the painting can pick up a load of contrast paints and get a result they would be happy with. And so far, I'm pretty happy with it. I don't know what that says for my own skill or for what I consider good painting, but it's fun. It's all about fun. And if you're not having fun with it, why bother? Eh? Right, there's this one protrusion here. I'm not sure if I want to make it stone or bone. I think because it's so low down, I'm going to keep it as stone. Have it as a rocky projection or something like that, you know, whatever. It probably should be bone in all cases, but, you know, I'm painting this how I want. Okay. I think that will do for that. That's looking pretty solid. And we'll move on to the skulls, I think. Or shall we base coat these big toothy things? I think if I base coat them first with a bit of wraithbone. In fact, yes, let's do a pass with wraithbone first and make sure that we have everything we want to have a touch of wraithbone on it. Actually has it. So I have some wraithbone over here, which again is the other contrast paint recommended base coat. Okay, so I'm switching up to a Wargamer small dry brush. Basically because I don't need a lot of this paint to be on it, I just need it to have, you know, enough. I don't need too much. but it's not going to be a dry brush, it's going to be a bit of an overbrush. What is an overbrush, you say? Well, it's basically a dry brush done wrong. It's a bad dry brush. Is what an overbrush is. You don't take all the paint off the brush, or a lot of the paint off the brush. You just take enough so that you're not laying down a solid layer. We'll start with the skulls. So let's look at the skulls and we'll get a bit of wraithbone on them. And I only want to hit the upper surfaces of them, so that when we come to add a bit of a contrast paint to them, there is a bit of an actual bone colour on them and they're not just completely featureless. It should add an extra level of depth to them as well once they have the wraithbone on them. And again, if it doesn't go without saying, guys, be very careful if you're doing this step, because that's what happens. You just put some paint where you really don't need it. And in fact, we might actually get away with just doing maybe some of the larger clutches of skulls. Stuff that's easier to get or easier to reach with the brush. We could also like say that, you know, the rest of the skulls are sort of being left in a bit of shade. So stuff that's a bit more open, I guess. Go in and tidy some of that up later. So these growths here, I think I'm also going to do with this. Just to, again, get a sort of a bony colour onto them before we start adding any contrast paint. So it's really just going to be a matter of doing something to them like that. It'll warm them up a bit once you put the contrast paint down, because at the minute everything else is very cold, and this will start to add a bit of warmth to the parts. So essentially that, I'm going to do that to the rest of these little spikes and stuff. I'll be able to show that to you when they're all done. We're also going to be adding some of this wraithbone. Hang on, I'll just do a little bit of it now before I work off camera a little. So on these characters, now remember I mentioned before that because these are more human-esque characters, they're not full-on harpies. I want them to have a bit more of a human skin tone, whereas the harpies I don't mind so much. So we're going to add a bit of wraithbone to these two ladies here. Basically over the higher highlights, so on her thigh, her chest, a bit of her face. So that when we come to actually put a skin colour or a skin contrast paint down onto them, they will have a bit more of a healthy sort of normal skin tone appearance. Whereas the harpies, I don't care if they look cold and dead and weird, because they are cold. And I don't know if they're dead, but they're certainly weird. So under close cam we can see here I've added some wraithbone to several details, like teeth on the wood, this big eye that's in here, dry brushed the spiky bits, the big growths, and the skulls, and we've added some wraithbone to our two characters up here and our two characters down here, and that's to, as I've said before, just to get a bit more of a realistic sort of look. I've also added some to each of the slaves, and this is one of the first times you'll have seen the slaves under camera, and I want to keep them very simple, very basic, because I want them to be almost as dark as the carriage. I want them to have a little bit of colour with their robes and their garb, but overall I don't want them to stand out too much, because they're not the focal point. They're, for lack of a better term, they're a tool that moves the carriage, so they're not going to be full of pomp and ceremony. They're clearly not. They're clearly not there willingly, so I don't want them to look like they've had any sort of special attention. I want them to look quite dull and quite dark and sort of blend in with the rest of it. But our four main characters on the carriage itself, yes, they're going to have to be quite standy out. So with the wraithbone down, it's now time to get out some skeleton horde, which again, another contrast paint, and we're going to be applying that to all the areas that I've put wraithbone onto except the four characters. So that'll, and the eye, there's one big eye there I want to do with yellow. So let's just have at it. I'll get some out onto the palette here. And this will go down very nicely over the skulls. So let's just start in and just apply that. Again, don't mind if it's going to pull a bit, it should be alright, it should blend in quite nicely once it's dry. If not, I can always take a little bit of wildwood or Agrax Earthshade later on just to shade in those lines a bit more. But this is going to really add something to the whole effect now. We're going to see how all of this is starting to come together, and I think it was worth the effort going over these skulls with the Wraithbone because they do stand out very nicely indeed. And Wraithbone really does lend itself to the Skeleton Horde contrast paint very nicely. So let's just go on in here and we'll not be too careful. So we can see now that we have all the Skeleton Horde dry, if I can show it stably enough, all looking pretty good. I've applied a yellow to the eye there, and we're going to be applying a little bit of a black into there too, just to get that that pupil sort of look there. That was, let me see here, Eandon Yellow, again another contrast paint, looks very good on that, nice and sinister. And I think at this point I want to start working on the figures on the carriage. Now, I know I'd said I wanted to make these look a bit more human, and I'm still planning on doing that, but I'm going to do it in two stages. I want them to look human but alien, human but harpy-ish, I guess. So what we're going to do is a layer, a contrast paint of a flesh tone, and then after that we're going to do a second layer, which will be a purplish tone. And we'll not go as heavy on that, we'll just use it as a tint more than anything else. So that's what we'll do for these two, and for the woman performing the sacrifice. However, the woman that's being sacrificed, we're going to keep her as more of a human-esque sort of tone. Same, pardon me, with the slaves as well. They're just going to get the human tone first. So, which tone am I going to use? I have Gilliman Flesh here, which we're going to try out first, and just see what that looks like. We'll probably put it in a fairly thin coat. More just to see how it starts to look, and then I can look at my purple tones after that. So let's get a bit of that down onto the palette. It's not a very thick contrast paint in comparison to some of the others that we've been using, so that should work to our advantage, and we should be able to get a nice skin tone off these characters straight away. And what I'm going to try and do is avoid the clothing that they have, which in a lot of the cases on these miniatures there isn't a lot of anyway. So let's just see how we get on with this. I think this is looking okay at the minute. It's maybe a bit too heavy between our breasts there, but that's alright. We can dab that away, remove some of it. And you can see now why I wanted to apply some of the Wraithbone as well. It gives the skin a bit of a warmer feel to it, rather than just the Greyseer, which would make her look very cold and I think more unpleasant than it really needs to look. Although we could honestly probably just get away with traditional painting their armour. So yeah, let's just do that. Let's not fight the contrast paint too much here and just let it flow wherever it wants to, and we'll just do a little bit of traditional painting on them after that. Okay, so I'm kind of liking what this is doing. The grey, the black to white zenithing is working really well, and that little bit of Wraithbone is bringing up quite a nice looking skin tone. Again, we'll probably end up contrast painting the see, it's hard to tell what on this arm is armor and what's skin, so bit of a difficult one, that. Bit of a difficult decision. I think her elbows are exposed. Parts of her arm are exposed. It's quite hard to tell, but that's okay. I don't think it matters too much. So we'll be doing this to our 4 main characters here, as well as our slaves. We're not going to touch the harpies with this. I'd rather they looked a lot more ethereal, like noticeably more ethereal than anything else. And I think what we're going to end up with is going to be a very charming, very interesting finish. Particularly these two. I'm really liking what it's doing with these two. So now we have the Gilliman flesh down. These are looking really nice. So once it's dry, you get a real nice skin tone building up there. It looks a little pale in places, which is good. Looks a bit richer in others, which is almost perfect for me. And up on the top here, I think we've also got a pretty good result. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. Now, before I move on too much further, I think I want to try and tackle the cauldron on the top, and I want to make it look like it's blood. She's a sacrifice. I would imagine there's going to be a lot of blood in there. I assume. So I want to use several different colours for that, and I'm hoping I have all of them here. So the first one is going to be, of course, Blood Angels Red. So maybe chuck in a little bit of Gryph-hound Orange. We want it to be quite dark, really, don't we? Yeah, I think we want it to be kind of dark. So we'll add a little bit of Cygor Brown as well. So again, a whole bunch of contrast paints, and we'll see what we get with that. So I'm going to try and do this all in one shot. Try and make it look, what's the best way to put this? Blend it all together. Let the colours bleed into each other a bit. And I think the Cygor Brown's going to have to be the really, like, sort of last-ish tone to it, I think. So let's start with the Blood Angels Red anyway first. Let's get a load of that down and see what that does for us. So get that down onto the palette here. Put it down over there. It is a very lovely colour. I love Blood Angels Red. So I want to do this first because I don't want to start working on the other cloth details and stuff without this section done at least. So let's see, we're going to slap the Blood Angels Red down. And we are going to go very heavy with it. We need to go very heavy with it. Because I need it to stay wet long enough to allow the bleeding effect to happen when I start to add the other colours. And also the other reason I'm doing this first is because we're going to be metallic painting the cauldron, so it doesn't matter if I get any of this over the edge of it or anywhere I don't really want it, as long as I don't mess up the characters too much. And it's going to be a bit of a challenge to get it in and around the characters because there is a gap between the two of them there. And between the front lady's back and the other lady's legs, there's a fair amount of a gap there, so. It also does help that there is some ripple patterns on the part on the fluid top, so that will aid with what we're trying to do. This is also going to be the first real big shot of colour, and I've been looking forward to doing this for the last couple of hours, I think, while I've been tinkering at it. I've been like, I really want to just shove the red down on this and see what happens. See if I can do it in a way that looks realistic. There we go. I guess maybe it doesn't matter so much if I get a little bit on the characters, because, you know, she's almost up to her waist in this stuff, so actually the ripple effect of the resin is doing a pretty neat job itself already, so. But I don't want this to look like a whole big cauldron full of fresh blood. I want it to look like they've had it for a while, you know, they've been building it up slowly and surely. So what I'll do is add a few more sort of patches of it just to make sure it stays good and damp. Right, quickly rinse the brush off. and I think we're going to have to go with, let me see here, maybe the Gryph-hound orange. No, let's chuck in, how are we going to do this to work best? I think we'll add some skeleton horde first. So this is really off the cuff, guys. Like, if this doesn't work, fair enough, I've given it a go. So while this paint is still wet, we're going to start getting the skeleton horde to bleed into it. Sort of patchy, make a sort of a patchy mess. This is almost giving it sort of a purple-ish sort of colour, which is kind of interesting. If I had Flesh Terror's red to hand, I would definitely be using that too. I have some army painter stuff around as well. Maybe that might help a little bit. Gotta be careful that I don't make it bleed too much. Which is ironic when I'm talking about making a cauldron that's full of blood. And I don't want it to bleed. I don't want it to bleed too much.
Nobody makes me bleed my own blood.
But we're going to see what this does. This will probably definitely take a while to dry, but that's looking pretty interesting. So I wonder what else we could get away with adding into it. Let me see what I have over here in the Army Painter range. A lot of tones, but not... Oh, there's a red. So we can chuck some of this in. This will give me maybe a deeper color as well. Let's spill some of that out. It's it's like a deep crimson burgundy sort of color. You see that on the palette. That is a very, it's an arterial sort of look to it. And let's see what that does for us as well. Maybe focus the addition of it around the hem of the, and maybe in and around where everything's going into shadow. A bit like that. Let's get a bit more of our mix in there. So I think forcing that darker color in and around the figures is going to help a lot more with the overall effect. You can see there's little bits I'm missing in behind the two of them. And in particular, I'm going to take it off camera for a little sec, in particularly right under the cloak there. I really want to get that the darker side of it gathered up a bit more. So I do apologize. I understand I need to be showing this more, but I need to also see from my point of view where this effect is going and how it's lying. So I'm trying to add darker patches where it's settling a bit lightly. So now this is really starting to look cool. That is really starting to look nice. What I need to do now is quite literally leave it alone. So I'm going to let it sit off to one side for a while, let it settle, let it pool. In the meantime, I can always go and find some nice blood effects paints as well. I know we have some from Green Stuff World out there that I'd like to play with as well. But in the meantime, I think I'm going to work on our sleeves. So I have the sleeves done with the flesh, that's the Gilliman flesh tone. And all I really need to do with them now is, on these ones in particular, paint the wood. There'll be a little bit of metallic banding there, but I want to work on the cloth too. And I think I'm going to do the cloth first because I want it out of the way. It's one of the lower colorations. And I'm not honestly too sure of what colour I want to do them. Do I want to do them a brown, or do I want to make them look a bit more than that? I think maybe just stick with the browns. Keep everything low, keep the important details be a bit brighter. That's my thinking right now. And let me see what colours I have that I could play with. Let's have a look at Nazdrag Yellow here and see if this looks like a sort of a sackcloth kind of thing. I've just noticed I put that in the way. I'm going to have to move it. And if Nasdrag Yellow gives me a sort of a Hessian kind of look, I'd be very keen on doing that. So let's have a look at that. I think we could get away with that. Yeah, because that's still a brownish tone, but has a yellow hint to it, and I'm finding that kind of appealing for these guys. So let's see what we can do and see if that works. And if it works, we can go ahead and do the rest of it. I think making them look, you know, they're not being given clothing for much reason, and it's definitely not the best stuff that could be given to them. Could be the remnants of robes that they maybe owned, or something like that. It's, you know, it's an interesting. I think I'm digging the yellow, so at the minute I think that's what I'm going to be going for. It also doesn't really take away from the skin tone, but doesn't seem to be making one or the other stand out too much. And I do want their clothing and their skin tone to sort of just show that they're there, but not make any particular feature of them stand out. I think that Nasdrag Yellow is doing a good job of that. So yeah, I'm quite convinced that that's the way I'm going to go with them. So yeah, I think we'll go with that. I quite like how that looks. So I'm going to go ahead and do all this while the blood in the cauldron is drying and pooling. And when it's all dry, I'll let you see how it's turned out and see if there's any further steps that we need to undertake. So we have a few things to cover real quick. First, I put some Black Templar into the slit of that eye there, just to make it look a bit more gross and a bit more believable. Further down, I've painted some Black Templar contrast paint into the wheels on both sides and at the back. The central hub part I'm probably going to do in the same gold that we're going to do the cauldron up here at the top. The cauldron has now mostly dried, so I can show you that a bit more clearly, and I'm liking what it's doing. I really do like that mixture of a couple of different contrasts and the red wash. I enjoy what that's done. It's made a very interesting effect. But the very last thing I want to do on this, when the time comes, is get more gloss in there. I have some blood effect. We have some Green Stuff World blood effect out there, and it dries gloss. And I want to use that, but I'm only going to use that as the last step because I want to put a matte varnish over everything before I do that. I want to protect the paint a little bit. Also, if I rotate the model around here and bring it up, I've painted the spikes in the front in the same way that I did the skulls, so they've been dry brushed a bit with Wraithbone and then given the Skeleton Horde contrast paint. I wasn't sure what other way I wanted to do them, and I was letting them hang around for a while and trying to figure out what way I wanted them to go. But it balances them. It balances the model out, having a bit of that at the front as well as that effect on the back as well. So, with that all said and done, I'm going to be very quickly, I think we're going to try and get some colour maybe onto Our Lady's cloak here, maybe onto the cloaks on the back of the other two, and that's going to be the same process I'm going to use to colour the harpies as well. So we'll start with a harpy and we'll see how it looks. So let me get a little group of them in here. Let's get this group here. So we're going to use Magos Purple, which is another one of our contrast paints, and we're going to basically give them a coat of that, and then after that we're going to paint the wings, the loincloths that some of them are wearing, and probably the hair. I'd say, yeah, the hair as well we're going to do in Black Templar as well. I want to keep it simple and let the airbrushing steps do a lot of the work for us. So we're going to start with the Magos Purple. I'll get some of that onto the palette, so just give me a sec. Now I'm hoping for a nice ethereal looking harpy here, so let's see what we get, shall we? Let's just go for it, and if it's wrong, we'll figure something else out. So let's start with this harpy down here and see what this does to her skin. And because a lot of the other details I'm going to put in Black Templar, I'm not too worried about overstepping the colour too much. So let's just see how this actually looks. Because I think the purple and the black is going to look pretty nice together. And I think that is basically going to be a winner for my harpies. Once that's dry, that'll hopefully look quite nice. So onto the back. Does she have any skin visible on the back? There's a little bit on her thigh and her right buttock there, so we'll just go for it. That'll do. I think there's a part leg visible there. Again, not worried about any of the other details here because this is going to be going metallic and these are going to be going to Black Templar, as well as this cloth up here too. So let's just do another one and see how that goes. She's a lot brighter. This one up here is a lot brighter. And it's not often I say I'm glad that these characters aren't wearing a lot of clothing. I am actually kind of glad that they're not at this stage because it makes getting the colour down on them a lot easier. There's not a lot of other things to consider apart from hair and a bit of cloth here and there. There's a couple of skulls hanging around as well, and we can probably avoid those. But I would say the majority of the rest of this is just going to go Black Templar for simplicity's sake. Again, not worried about the hair. We just want to make sure we get all the skin. And I think that's going to look quite effective with all of those in purple, especially once the wings and the cloth and the hair are all done. I think that should be quite interesting. So let's put them down for now. We'll continue those off camera. And let's have a look at... Let's start with these two ladies down here at the front. I know I'd said I was maybe going to put the purple over their skin. I've really gone off that idea now. I kind of like more of them being more of a humanish sort of cultists that are calling forth all the harpies and stuff to do the, you know, the bidding and whatnot, and making sacrifices and that sort of thing. And I think we're just going to try and colorize their cloaks with the Magos purple here. So, and we'll probably make their hair Black Templar as well, just to, again, for simplicity's sake. It might have been easier to have picked Shyish purple, or Shyish purple, but I'm not too sure if it would give me an effect that I'd have been more confident in trying to achieve. So, because it is about confidence too. It's about knowing what the paint is going to do when I put it down on something. I think that's going to look quite good. So you can see as that's starting to dry, that's going to look quite interesting. At least I think it looks quite interesting. It's over to you guys if you think it is or it isn't. Same with the lady's cloak up here at the top. I really want that to be purple. It may need more than one coat of Magos purple to achieve the coloration that I want. And it's almost like she's wearing a veil here, which is kind of interesting. So you can see under close cam here, I've done a little bit of a change, and I'm not sure if I'm overly happy with this yet, but instead of the Magos purple, I obviously put the first layer of Magos purple down, and then thought, right, this is going to take way too long and going to ruin the effect, so I've used some Shyish purple instead, put one layer over it there, but put a heavier layer around the base of the robe here to make it look more like it was a damp sort of velvet look. I'm still not entirely happy with it, but I am going to continue on with it and then figure that out. But I've also put the Shyish purple onto the cloaks of the two characters down here as well. And obviously it's not as bright and vibrant as I'd wanted initially, but I think it looks a bit better because it's a heavier looking material as compared to the harpies, who are quite pale but yet a bit more vibrant, particularly under certain light anyway. They look a lot more vibrant. So I've pushed on a little bit. I'm going to do another a bit more shyish purple on that, on the big cloak and stuff, because I'm just not happy with how that looks. Maybe I should go another layer of Magos just to sort of richen it up a bit. But the next thing I'm trying to do is to push on with the harpies and the slaves, and then there's going to be a whole bunch of off-camera base coating that I want to do as well, and then I can come back and show you how I'm going to dull them down or make them blend in a bit. So on the harpies, it's pretty straightforward. It's taking Black Templar contrast and just painting in the wings and painting in any of the claws. Now, of course, there's tons of detail on each one of these, and there's little quills down here on her thigh, there's a necklace there and stuff like that. I'm going to be honest with you and say that I don't want to do those details now, because it'll extend the length of the tutorial, and it's something we can always come back to and look at a later date. However, we will be doing stuff like painting her armor, what armor she has anyway, and these two down here, we're going to be painting their armor as well. But that's going to be part of a base coating step that's going to come up. So the other thing I've done on the slaves, I've painted their hair in, and their hair is basically just Gore Grunta fur, again another contrast paint, and that's giving me a sort of a dull ginger effect. I've also done it on the lady that's being sacrificed up here, and it's made her look a lot more like a redhead. So it's worked better on her because her highlights with the airbrush have been a lot higher. They actually went right up to white on the majority of her face and down her front and her hair. So she looks remarkably more lively than the people that are moving this thing around. So what I'm going to be doing next is looking at metallics. So we're going to be painting the crucible, or I'm going to keep calling it crucible or cauldron. We're going to be painting that in Retributor armor, which is one of Citadel's base colors. We'll also be painting this in Retributor armor. Same with Our Lady doing the sacrifice. Her armor, her shoulders, and the bra that she has on, and the banding on her arms, those will also go Retributor armor, as well as the equipment that these two ladies are wearing down here. Also, we're going to paint in these sort of hubcaps, painting them in Retributor armor as well. After that, the next base coating step will be to look at some darker metallics. So we're going to be looking at these chains and stuff. We're going to paint them in Lead Belcher, which won't, again, there's another dark metallic-ish, or a dark-ish metallic silver. The undersides of these, which have a little bit of a banding to them, I think we'll keep them Retributor armor as well. And the central band and spikes on the wheels, they will also go Lead Belcher. So while we're at it, I think I'll decide on the swords now. I think the swords are going to go Retributor armor as well, mainly because I want to put Magos purple over them and give them sort of a purpley gold sheen to them. I want them to look a little bit odd. But for the meantime, what I am going to do on this sitting is I'm going to take a look at their hair and the other harpies. So I have my Black Templar set somewhere. Yep, there it is. So this was, when the contrast range came out, one of the most popular colours. We found it very hard to keep it in store. Not so much a problem now, although we notice a few other colours. There's like a little bit of a cycle going on what colours are particularly wanted. So Black Templar was great at the start, and it still is one of the better contrast paints in the range. One of the more useful, because you can do so much with it. There's so many applications for it that you really should just check out. So we've got our Black Templar on. We're going to paint in the hair on these two ladies here. And what it does is give us, once it's dry, sort of a shiny black. So the highlighted areas with the airbrush give us a little bit of a highlight, just to reinforce the fact that this hair is indeed quite dark. And it's not a difficult step. Black Templar is one of the, like I've said before, one of the better paints in the range for consistency and for effect, because you know what it's going to do. It's essentially a thinner black paint that sits into recesses when you put it down on something, and it works out really well. So we'll just do a little bit of this just to make sure we have her hair done. I know that most of this part of the video is just talking, because it's really just a case of explaining what's going to happen, because most of it is all sort of base coating. I don't necessarily want to teach you guys how to suck eggs. I think you know what base coating is by now. If you don't, fair enough. I totally understand. We have tutorials on that, I believe, so. I am seriously enjoying the choice of going with contrast paint on this, though, because it is working out well, and we're getting a good result that, again, with a lot of these tutorials I want to do now, is showing you get it on the table and worry about sweat the small stuff later. Do your broad strokes now, play with it, and then when you decide you're ready to add more detail, or you're confident in adding more detail, now is the chance. Then is the time to do it. But right now we can get it to a point where we're going to be happy to have this force lead some sort of demonic incursion, and it's going to look pretty badass. So obviously when we come to more details later on, we know what we're doing. Anyway, I'm going to push on with this. We'll get all that base coating that I was talking about, get it done, get it out of the way. We'll come back and we'll look at how we're going to be dulling it down and blending it in. So we're on the final straight, which is really cool, and I have the gold and the silver and all the other Black Templar on the harpies and stuff all done. So let's have a look at our gold, and that is very, very bright, isn't it? But I think it works well. It really makes the blood look very punchy, but don't worry, there'll be more punch to come for that. Further on down, I think these two are turning out great as well. Actually, on a note on this lady's robe here, or on her cloak, that's about another 2 or 3 layers of Magos purple over the shish purple. So that has warmed it up a little bit. It still looks a little dark, but I don't mind it being darker around this edge here, because it looks more like blood has soaked into the material itself. That's my excuse anyway. If you don't agree with me, that's fine. Totally understand. Further down then, on the wheels, we have the gold. Amazing looking hubcaps, very bling. And we have the silver on the spikes and the band in the middle, as well as the chain, which has been done in lead belcher too, and some of the gold applied to the front and the spikes. So it's time to start dulling down everything, and I think we're going to start with the gold. I really want the gold to look a bit more dull. So we're going to work with Skeleton Horde. We've worked with this before, so we're going to work with it again. It's just to kill the shine, the upper high shine of it a little bit. So let's get some of that onto my palette, and I think we'll start with a wheel, just to see what sort of effect we're going to get out of this. So let's check this out and see what happens. I think if we apply this pretty heavy, it'll shade this down quite nicely and just kill a little bit of that tint, or just a little bit of that bright reflectiveness. Because I don't necessarily want this to look clean and bright and shiny. I need the gold to come down a little step to sort of match in a little bit more with how dark and how gritty everything else has turned out. So we're going to keep going with this. Okay, so something like that. That's going to dull that gold down quite nicely when you compare it to the back wheel that has just the gold. I think that's going to look quite good. Let's try one of the figures as well. So let's look at these two at the front here, and let's start with her. I think it's going to work very well on her headpiece in particular, because you see how much it's defining the shadowed areas. have to be careful here as well. We don't want it to get onto areas that we don't want it on. So we definitely don't want any of it on our skin. Want to keep that skin a bit tidier looking. But we definitely want it on what I'm going to assume is a thong, but it's also holding her loincloth. Around to the side a little bit. We're going to take it up as far as the wrist and the hilt of the sword, because if we take it any further than that, it's going to ruin the effect that I want to get on the blades, which will be I'll do shortly here. So I think that's going to turn out quite well. The more sort of detail and stepping and stuff that's in on the part, the better contrast paint works for you. So, and there is definitely no lack of detail on this model in general. Never mind just the two figures here. So yeah, I think this is going to work out quite well. Try and catch this boot here as well, see if we can get her back into focus. Okay, so at this point I'm going to push on with this. We'll do a bit more just to show how this is going to turn out. Hopefully this will look pretty good too. And with the gold paint being a bit of a, being a gloss paint, you can see the contrast paint immediately does want to get into those recesses and sit in there. So that is going to give us the definition that we need on the gold detailing. So at this stage now we can see what the gold has done with the Skeleton Horde contrast paint, and it's dulled it down quite nicely. Now there is going to be a step where we're going to hit it with Citadel Munitorum varnish, which is sort of the satin varnish. That's just to protect all the contrast paints that we have used, because it will rub over time. You want to just make sure that that's settled. Anyway, that's how our gold has turned out so far. So the next thing I want to do is look at our swords, which I've just broke one of. I heard a little and I was like, oh no. So let's quickly fix it. It's this one here. It's broken a couple of times already, so let me just get a touch of super glue into that. God, for goodness sake. I can never win, Oh no. Okay, no, we're good. We're fine. Right, so we're going to look at the swords. I think we're going to start with her sword up here on top, because we've broken one of the other ones. And I'm just going to add a bit of Magos purple to those. Just a little bit of that, just to tint it, because I want them to clearly not be made of gold. I want them to have a sheen of something. So we can always work on this a bit more. What I'd ideally like to do, I'll maybe actually do it towards the end, is once I have the Magos purple down, I'd then get a bit of Necron compound, the dry paint, and just dry brush that blade a little bit and make it stand out a bit more. I put the idea in my head now, so I think I'm going to do that as well. But meantime, we'll just get a little bit of Magos purple down onto the blade. Again, it's more a step to bring the shape of the sword out and just make it look a little unusual. And I will say, yeah, for certain, I like that, and I will put a silver dry brush over that. I will put some Necron compound on that. Okay, so let's go down to the other two. Of course, there are other ways to do this, Other painting techniques are available. I think that's going to be my tagline from now on. Anytime I go to do something, other painting techniques are available. Right, that's enough for the swords. And the next thing I want to do is get some dark wash down onto our silver. So for the dark, we're going to be doing Null Oil, which is just the simple Citadel shade. And we're going to be putting that over the chains. And we're putting that over the metallic parts, the silver metallic parts of the wheels. So let me get this to the side here, and let's do some chains first. Let's take a little cluster of chains in the middle, make sure I'm in focus. Make sure there isn't too much wash on my brush. And while I'm doing this, I'm also going to explain the next step. So the next thing is I'm going to glue everything together. I'm going to put all the harpies on, I'm going to put all the slaves on, and then going to take it outside and I'm going to give it a coat of the Munitorum varnish, so that when we come back after this stage is done, the model is completely together. I'll let you have a look at how all the parts come together, what it looks like as a whole, and we'll wrap the video with doing the final blood effect on the top on the cauldron. So yeah, so we'll just continue on with this. I'll do one of the wheels here now under camera as well, just so that I'm not missing something on purpose. And yes, I'm being quite heavy with the wash. I do understand that, but I mean, if you want to bring it back, you can always dry brush, or you can choose a different color. This is just what I fancy going for, just to make the metal parts look rather heavy, because the gold really makes the miniature lighten up a little bit, but I still want to have that difference in materials sort of showing. And of course, everything I could be saying is just completely rubbish, you know. I'm just enjoying painting this. So the miniature has been taken out, been matte coated, all the stuff's been glued onto, all the harpies and the slaves and stuff. And I am going to say right now, if you're planning on using this in an army, base it. Absolutely 100% put it on a base, and put it on a large base as well, because you really don't want, when this is being transported around and stuff, you really have to pack it carefully, and a big base will help you do that, because this is going to be fragile. This, if it's not on a base, it will be fragile. I would almost say prohibitively fragile as well, because let's lift it up here and show you under camera what I mean. So here's all our harpies and stuff. I mean, there's no doubt that this has a real epic, evil feel to it, with all the harpies in place. But as we move down, you have the two other harpies here at the front. We then get down to here, and you can see these two slaves sort of hanging free in the breeze. But it gets worse, because you have these ones on the sides, and if I can very gently manipulate it further around, there's 4 more at the back, which all of them only have 1 glue point. So you have to be very, very careful if you have this miniature, or planning to buy this miniature. You need to be aware that you will have to base it if you plan on using it in any sort of army or collection. So there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that this is a gorgeous piece, but you've got to be very aware of how fragile it's going to be once you glue it all together. However, it does also justify my decision to build it and paint it in separate parts and then bring all those parts together at the end, because really you couldn't have done this with the whole model built. You already noticed that I've broken a sword on camera and then had to fix it. If I had to do this with all the harpies and stuff glued on, I don't think this would have been a project that would have been entertaining to watch. It would have been very difficult to show what I was trying to do, and overall a very complex piece to have worked around without breaking stuff more frequently. Anyway, that said and done, I did say there was one more spot I wanted to do. I'm not going to do the dry brush and the swords. I think that's taking one particular detail further than I've taken the rest of it. So that's where I'm going to leave it with the swords anyway. We can always go back to it and do extra highlighting and shading and stuff if we want. Remember, I'm trying to make this model look completely painted to a certain level, and then you can take it and play it, or you can stare at it for a while and wonder what you're going to do next, that sort of stuff. There's tons and tons you can do. So the last thing I want to do is just make the blood look a bit more shiny. And for that, I'm using Green Stuff World True Blood. This is a very interesting compound. It ends with a gloss finish, and that's exactly what I want on the top. Because we've satin varnished with the Citadel stuff, our blood, yeah, it's looking good, but it doesn't look like blood at the minute. It just kind of looks, what's the easiest way to put it? It just looks too flat. There's no texture, there's no depth. So the true blood, if I pour some out onto my palette here, and just pour some of it out, but you know, even at that point, it looks like actual blood, which is a bit concerning. Green Stuff World, what are you doing out there? But as an effects paint, I think it's going to work very well for the purpose we need it, which is obviously to create a more realistic blood effect. So let's make sure there's nothing on that brush. That's fine. And when I spread it out, you can see it actually is quite gelatinous. It is quite gloopy, which is great. And let's start applying our blood effect. So what's great is it doesn't matter so much if we get it into places we don't really want it to, because it looks like it sort of tide marks a little bit. And in hindsight, this is something I really should have done before gluing everything else onto the miniature, but at this point I'm content to get this step done and be happy that we have it done. So we're going to see how this interacts with the work we've already done as well, which is going to be interesting. I've not used the blood effect before, so this is me sort of adding this on the fly and hoping that it will complement the contrast paint work that we've previously done. It is very goopy, I have to admit. I quite like that too. It means I can run it up the edge of the cloak a little bit too, and it might aid with that soaking in effect, that kind of damp material I'm trying to go for on the edges of her cloak. So now this acts like a glaze, like an enamel, or, well, it's an acrylic, but it acts like a glaze. It's just a very thick glaze, and I'm certainly not complaining about that. I think this is going to look really cool, because what it's doing right now, as I'm seeing it settle, it is complementing the contrast paint work very nicely, and it's giving me that real deep arterial look to it. And I think as a final step, if you want something to draw the eye in, this is definitely going to be one of the details I would consider doing if you're making this model for yourself. It's also going to make me experiment with these blood effects a bit more, I think. But then there's always a point where you think, well, is this effect gaining me anything, or is it just an addition because of the sake of it? Like, there is points where I think, you know, on swords in particular, hey, that's a bit too much blood on that sword, or, you know, it depends. It's really personal taste and what you think you want from it, so. I don't mind taking it over the edge a little bit and maybe taking it up her hands and her thighs a little. That is going to look pretty good. Even if those bubbles don't go away, I think that's still going to look very nice when it's done. And it is complementing the contrast paint work. I can't tip it too much now because there's quite a lot of the effect down. So that has really livened up the blood effect from the contrast paints. So if you fancy doing something like that, I think that's definitely a way to go about it. Now, that's the model finished to this standard, to this level. I'd be happy to put this down on a table and play with it as part of an army. And what I want to enforce with these tutorials is that this is only the first step. If you feel like you want to add more detail, if you feel some of the things I've missed out should be painted, absolutely fine, we can go back in and we can do that. I always want to leave the miniature in a way that it has what you want for tabletop, and if you want to take it further, there's plenty of scope for you to do that. Covering the main colours, covering the shading where needed, a little bit of highlighting. Contrast paint has worked remarkably well with this too, and a little bit of traditional painting with the metallics really brings it all in and gives you something you can set down on a table and go, yeah, it's where I want it to be at the minute, and if I want to turn it into more of a display piece, I can. I know the steps that I can take from there. So I don't want to preach at you. Please, I apologize if you think I'm preaching too much. I'm just trying to reinforce what my thoughts are on these tutorials as I move on further and do some other ones. I like that sort of, I'm not like some of the other YouTube painters because they are superb people, really good high-end, high-quality stuff. And I always feel that sometimes that's a bit intimidating. So preaching over, that's where I want to fit myself in painting-wise. There's other people up here. I want to be down here a little bit because it's a comfortable level to paint at. Anyway, guys, this has been a heck of a project. If you want more information, please check out Raging Heroes. They have a vast range of stuff, which are all very interesting miniatures. They'll complement your armies well. They can create a force of their own as well, too, if you want to do that. So, again, thank you so much for watching and tolerating me for the past however long this has been. And take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all again next time.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.